This Bear art journal can be used as a glue book, a mixed media journal, or a watercolour art journal. G'day, I'm Donna from Australia, and I'm going to show you how I made these two art journals. The black and white one is a modern day cotton, and this pink one is a one only piece of vintage fabric from my stash. I've used watercolour paper in both. One is a little bit thicker than the other, and I've bound the covers two different ways. I've made this journal with a hollow back, but there's a twist to the way I've made it. So keep watching to see how I done it. So let's get started. I'll show you the pink one first. I used a 200 GSM Canson watercolour paper. Canson has been around for hundreds of years, so we know we've got some good quality here. It's in an A4 pad, so I can just tear these pages out. I've checked the grain, and I know this A4, when it's folded in half, is going the right way, and these will be the size of my journal pages. And when I'm done with the pad, I'm going to recycle the back piece of cardboard. The number of pages, I've got 28 sheets, folded in half, equals 56 pages, and since both sides are usable, that gives you 112 surfaces to create on. I've got 7 signatures with 4 pages in each, so I just punched in 5 holes because I used the 5-hole pamphlet stitch in this journal. I cut my own bookboard. You can use any thickness you like, but I've made my spine a lot thinner than my front and back cover. So here's my 3 pieces, front, spine and back. And I've cut these to be just a little bit bigger than my pages. My spine is 1.5 inches wide, which is plenty of room for my 7 signatures. For this one, I'm using a vintage fabric. You can use whatever fabric you like. This fabric is so unusual. Look at this weave. It's in long strands sitting on top of the base of the fabric. I've got to show you the back too. It's just as intriguing as the front. You've got to love these old style woven fabrics. So not to flatten this weave, I've steamed this fabric and it's ready for me to glue my bookboard down. I'm using a fabric glue and I cover the back of the bookboard, not the fabric. Smooth it out with my fingers and I place it on the back of my fabric with enough room to leave a 1-inch border around the edge. I'm also using spaces between the front page and the spine, and they are a 1/4 inch wide. And be careful not to glue these spaces down. They're just there so you can have the right gap on either side of the spine. The next step, I'm using my ruler width to draw a line around all 4 sides. This gives me a guide to cut off all the excess. And now this is much more manageable with even edges. I'm going to miter the corners. I use this little miter jig. I'll put the link in the description on how I made this below. I place the corner of my jig over the corner of my cover and I just draw a pencil line along the straight edge. Do this on all 4 sides and then come back and cut those corners off right on the line. What you've got to do now is glue the edges of your cover so you can fold the fabric over to have a lovely finished edge. I just do the bottom first and don't push your fabric too hard. Keep it even. Then I do the top edge and then I'll add some more glue on the foredge and making sure you get into those little corners. Don't over glue your corners or it'll squish out and you'll see it. So I pick my cover up and I pinch those corners in, and when you fold over the fabric, it just finishes your corners off beautifully. And this is why they're called a mitered corner. Give it a little bit of time to dry, and then you can reshape it with your fingers or your bone folder if you need to. Repeat the same on the other end, so no glue has pushed out when I press these corners. Now I'm just using my bone folder to push the folded fabric down into the hinges. I have a quick look at all of the edges and it's all glued down quite well. I'm going to cover the inside of the cover. I'm using this, it's like a hessian paper, but it hasn't got big holes in it like hessian. It's quite a close weave, and the texture in this paper is perfect to go with this fabric. Here's a tip. If your fabric is on the thick side like mine, just glue a piece of cardstock inside the borders so that when I glue my end covers on, it's not going to have a big ridge around the edge. Now just use your fabric glue directly onto the cardstock and in any gaps that you may have missed around the edge. Then on the edge of your end papers, just glue that and a little bit on the edge of your fabric and it'll all come together just nicely. Just place that end piece down over the top. I'll give it a little minute to dry and then I'll use my bone folder to give it a little press. I repeat the same on the inside of the back cover. You can see better here the texture of this paper. I'm going to use the same textured paper to cover the spine area, but just in a different colour. So this piece has to be the same height as the pink and as wide as you would like it to be. I'm going to mark my holes directly onto this piece. To make this much easier, I've made a template. So all the holes on this template need to be transferred onto the brown spine piece. This is the best way that I figured out how to do it. Using my awl, I pierce the holes in all of the marked places on my template. Then tape your template down the very centre of this piece. And then I'm going to use my pen to mark the holes directly onto the spine piece. Before I glue this down, I've gone ahead and picked what thread I want to use. I like this colour. It's quite unusual, but it goes really well with this fabric. So I need 7 lengths of thread to sew in my 7 signatures. Next step, we're going to glue this piece right down the centre of the spine. So I like to put the glue all over my cover piece and then just on the book border of the spine. I line up my binding cover piece and just glue it into place. Give it a gentle press. Don't go pushing. If you're using fabric here and you push hard, you are going to push the glue through. Once the glue's gone off a little bit, just press it down with the flat side of your bone folder. I'm going to leave this for about 15 minutes to dry before I try and close the cover. Right, now this part's dry and I can open and close this cover and there's no stress on these hinges. So with the inside facing up, I place my cover on a phone book and just using my hand awl, I'm going to punch a hole everywhere there's a white dot. Because I've got this woven fabric on the outside, it's very hard to see the holes. They're almost non-existent. So what I'm going to do is once I've punched all the holes, I'm going to place my signature down that line of holes, and when I start sewing, I'm going to keep my awl very handy, and each hole I go to sew into on the cover, I'm going to re-pierce the hole. So I start sewing from the middle hole as usual, poke that hole in my cover, and then push my needle through. Now I'm going to use my awl again on the next hole up. You can see the awl come out this side, And now, without taking my eye off that hole, I just push the needle back through. And I keep sewing. And I do this on every single hole. I come through from the paper and then I'll re-pierce the hole in the cover. It might not go through unless you keep doing this. Now that signature has been sewn in. I'm just going to tie it off. And I'm pretty happy with this. And I'm going to move on and sew the next signature in and so on until all 7 are done and it looks pretty darn good. I do like the minimalist look, and you can see that the fabric and the coloured stitches are doing all the work here. But there's absolutely no reason why you could not go ahead and embellish your cover. It is an art journal after all. The corners turned out really good. The pages turn beautifully. And there's a little gap between each signature, which is going to allow for this to expand, especially if you use it as a glue book. Now I'm going to show you the second blank art journal that I've made. This is not a full-on step-by-step tutorial. You'll notice that with the pink journal. And this one I'm using a 300 GSM watercolor paper, and I'm showing you how important the grain is in the paper if you use an A3 size. To work with the grain here, I've cut my A3 sheet in half on the landscape. The grain of this paper is going from the top to the bottom. I'll show you a little bit more about this when I actually start folding the pages. I've made this journal with a hollow spine, and there's a twist to this spine. I'm going to sew some faux stitches in the cover on the outside so it looks like the signatures were sewn in through the cover. I'm using 100% cotton for this cover, and I just picked this up from my local quilting shop. If you want to get your stitches even all the time, make a template. I've made a template as tall as my spine, and I've glued it onto the spine. Then I'm gluing the spine piece onto the piece of fabric on the inside of it so that it's held in place, and I can pierce the holes through the template and the fabric. And if you can't see your holes on the outside of the fabric like I've got here, just use a friction pen. The marks this pen leaves will disappear if you just wave heat over it. I'm using an embroidery floss, all 6 strands, and I'm just going to sew down the length of each row as if I was sewing in a signature, but just not adding the signatures to it. You can do a running stitch, a back stitch, whatever decorative stitch you want to use here. I put some glue on this part of the fabric and glue it down on the top and the bottom. I just want to push in here and say that I've made my cover 1/8 of an inch bigger around the edge than my pages. Off camera, I have covered the front and the back with the fabric using the mitered corner method like I showed you in the pink journal at the beginning. Now I'm going to assemble my cover. I'm just using a PVA glue, and I'm going to glue the front cover to the right side of the spine and the back cover to the left side. I'm going to leave a hinge in it the same as I would any other journal. So I'm using my spacer. So this is 1/4 inch away from the spine edge, and this is where I will glue the cover onto the spine piece. I've glued these down off camera, but you can see that they form a hinge near the spine. I'm making the pages now, so I've got my A3 sheet and I've cut it in half to make 2 A4 pieces. When I fold this A4 piece in half, look at the edge here. It's cracked. It doesn't crease smoothly, and that's because it's been folded against the grain. So if I get the same A4 sheet and I fold it long ways, look at the difference in the crease. So if ever your paper cracks when you fold it, you'll know you're going against the grain. So what I've done to make my pages here and be able to use the A3, I've split it here, I've cut it, and then I've folded the pages, and that way they go with the grain. To bind my pages, I've used the kettle stitch, and I watched 𝗏𝗏𝗏's tutorial.
Hello, it's Jennifer from 𝗏𝗏𝗏.
Jennifer is currently on sick leave. Jennifer, I hope each day brings you a little more strength and healing. You are in my thoughts and prayers, and I look forward to seeing you back to your wonderful self soon. After sewing all my pages together, I just glued this piece of fabric. This is a piece of linen, so it's nice and sturdy. I've also cut out and glued the end papers to the inside of the cover. Now what I do is I make a little template to glue over the top of these stitches here. So I cut it out in black and then I glue it on. And this is because when the book block is sitting here, it's not getting glued to that black piece. It's going to be only glued by the side pieces of fabric. I line the book block spine directly over the cover spine. And I just sit it with the pages sitting up in the air, and I prop up the opposite side so they don't fall over. Now I'm putting some tape down on the back cover, and then I lift up my fabric, and this is so that when I put my glue on the cover here, that it doesn't come out past this tape. So I just use a bit of the PVA glue and I get it right up to the edge of the spine here and spread it all over the paper lining. Then I just flop down my piece of fabric and gently pat it down into the glue. I put a piece of grease-proof paper over the top and just prop it up. I've already done the other side, so when this is dry, it's going to be finished. I left it for a good half hour and come back and it dried perfectly. You can see the hinges here that I left that gap for, and it turned out beautiful. It's totally different to the first journal. And just to show you how the hollow back works, there's no glue in this spine. I can put this crochet stick from the top and push it out the bottom, and that's why it's called the hollow back spine. There's a big difference between the 5-hole pamphlet stitch and the kettle stitch, but either way, whichever method you use, you're gonna love it. The pages lay nice and flat. The kettle stitch has no gap between the pages and a stitch in the middle showing. They turn and lay nice and flat, just like the pamphlet stitch does. But I would go as far as to say I think they lay flatter. And that's the kettle stitch. I think it lays flatter. Combine beautiful papers with fabric and try using watercolour paper. 200 GSM in the pink one and 300 GSM in the black and white one. But I loved how these turned out. I hope you have a go at them. If you're not one to journal, make yourself an art journal, and that way you can glue things in it or paint directly onto the pages.
Skin glows and it shines like glue. I'm pretty without